It's been an ongoing situation with him threatening her, wishing her death, taking keys to her apartment. We've had to pay to change locks. And at this point, my daughter has lupus. Both of her kidneys weren't working. She's not working herself.
Okay, so picture this. It's a Wednesday afternoon. The sun is still up. Kids are coming home from school. Neighbors are going about their day. And then gunshots. Not in some dark alley. Not in the middle of the night. Right outside an apartment building in a quiet, family-friendly part of Washington, D.C. A woman is lying on the ground, shot multiple times. Her 10-year-old daughter is beside her, bleeding from her arm. And somewhere in that parking lot, a black pickup truck is already speeding away, with a 3-year-old little boy trapped inside. That woman was Rayven Amuan Edwards. And what happened to her on February 11, 2026, is one of the most heartbreaking stories I have ever brought to this channel. And listen, before we go any further, if you're new here, please like this video, subscribe to Crime Files, and click that bell icon so you never miss a story. Because the stories we tell here, they matter. The people we talk about, they deserve to be remembered. So let's make sure Rayven's story reaches as many people as possible. Now, let me introduce you to Rayven. Rayven Amuan Edwards was 34 years old. She was a D.C. native, born and raised in the Brightwood Park neighborhood of Northwest Washington. If you knew her, she was the kind of person that people gravitate toward, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she was warm, quiet, real. Her family describes her as someone who never raised her voice, never had a bad word for anyone. Her mother, Lucy Edwards, said it simply, "My daughter never did anything to anyone." You couldn't even get her to say anything bad. Growing up, Rayven had big dreams. She loved the arts. She wanted to be an actress. As a kid, she and her older brother would record little skits together, goofing around, playing pretend. There was a light in her. Her family says, a quiet kind of shine that never really went away, even when life got hard. And life did get very hard for Rayven. She was diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease that causes the body's immune system to attack its own healthy tissue. On top of that, she developed chronic kidney disease, so severe that she required dialysis, a treatment that essentially does the job your kidneys can no longer do, filtering waste from the blood. That means multiple appointments a week, hours hooked up to a machine, exhaustion, pain, and a body that fights you every single day. Most people dealing with that level of illness would fold. Rayven didn't. She kept going. Why? Because she had 3 children who needed her. Her oldest was her daughter, Royal, age 10, who had recently been diagnosed with autism. Then there was her 8-year-old son, John. And the youngest was her 3-year-old baby boy, Million. 3 kids, a sick body, and a relationship that was about to become the most dangerous thing in her life. Now here is where things start to get complicated. And I need you to really follow me here, because this part of the story is important if we're going to understand how Rayven ended up where she did. The man who would ultimately take Rayven's life was named Stephon Marquis Jeter. And the strange thing is, Rayven and Stephon had actually known each other since they were children. They had been classmates in the 2nd grade. They didn't reconnect until years later, as adults, through mutual friends. And when they did, they started a relationship. Rayven fell for him. They had a son together, little Million, and for a time, maybe things seemed okay from the outside. But behind closed doors, the relationship was deteriorating. First, according to Rayven's mother and family members, Stephon was abusive, physically and mentally. D.C. police confirmed they had responded to numerous domestic-related calls involving the pair. The family says Stephon would threaten Rayven. He wished harm on her. He took her apartment keys without permission and, at one point, threw all of her clothes out her home. They had to change the locks just to keep him out. And here's the part that will probably hit different if you've ever known someone in an abusive relationship. Rayven sometimes didn't want him arrested. Her mother said she was scared for him to be locked up because, even through everything, she still wanted Million to have a father in his life. That's not weakness. That is a mother caught between protecting herself and trying to preserve something for her child. It's a trap that thousands of domestic violence victims fall into every single year. But the situation was escalating. In the weeks before the shooting, Stephon had been pushing to move back into her apartment. Rayven said no. She was done. She was trying to end things. And apparently that decision, the decision to leave, to say enough, is what set everything in motion. Now, let me tell you about who Stephon Jeter really was, because I think this part is important context. He was 35 years old, and he already had a very serious criminal record. In 2019, he was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to being part of a conspiracy to buy guns in Georgia and illegally traffic them onto the streets of Washington, D.C. That is not a small crime. That is not a bad decision made in the moment. That is a man who was already connected to violence and illegal weapons long before February 11th. And as a convicted felon, he was legally prohibited from owning a gun. Yet, on that Wednesday afternoon, he had won. The system had seen Stephon Jeter before, and Rayven's family had been sounding the alarm for months. So, how did we get here? February 11th, 2026. A Wednesday. It was around 4:39 in the afternoon when the Metropolitan Police Department received a call. Shots fired. Apartment complex at the 4100 block of W Street, Northwest, Glover Park neighborhood. What officers found when they arrived was devastating. Rayven Amuan Edwards was outside the building, shot multiple times. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her 10-year-old daughter, Royal, had been shot in the arm and was rushed to the hospital with injuries described as non-life-threatening. And Rayven's 8-year-old son, John, was there too, unharmed physically, but he had seen everything. A neighbor who lived in the complex told reporters what they heard. I heard screaming, which I thought was kids, blood curdling. A young girl was there with blood coming down from her arm, saying her stepdad had just shot her mom, and she thinks she's dead. That little girl was Royal, 10 years old, standing outside, bleeding, telling whoever would listen that her mother had just been killed. Let that sit with you for a second. Police Chief Jeffrey Carroll confirmed that the argument had started inside the apartment, spilled into the hallway, and then moved outside, where Stephon pulled out a gun and opened fire. He shot Rayven. He shot her daughter. And then he fled. In his truck, with 3-year-old Million in the back seat. An Amber Alert went out almost immediately. Police were looking for a black pickup truck. Stephon Jeter, a convicted felon with a gun, was on the run with a toddler. For hours, the city was on edge. Where was he going? What was he planning to do with that little boy? Was Million safe? It was around 6:30 in the evening when Prince George's County Police in Maryland spotted the truck. They started a pursuit. Stephon drove, and he drove fast, and he drove recklessly, back across the D.C. line, into Southeast, until he crashed at the intersection of 30th Street and Nash Place. When officers approached the truck, Stephon Marquis Jeter was inside. He had shot and killed himself. The chase was over. But Million was not in the truck. That was a twist that nobody expected. The whole reason the city had been holding its breath, that little boy's safety. And he wasn't even with Stephon when the chase ended. Hours later, authorities confirmed that Million had been found safe and unharmed at a family member's home in Prince George's County. At some point during his flight, Stephon had left the child with someone. We may never know exactly when or why. But Million was alive, in the middle of a nightmare. That was the one piece of news that gave Rayven's family something to hold on to. On February 17th, the community gathered for a vigil at the Park Crest Gardens Apartments, the very building where Rayven had lived and died. Purple and white balloons filled the courtyard. Her sister, Rayven Edwards, stood up and said, "She was always like a second mother to us for a long time." Her aunt, Kathy Lawton, spoke about Rayven's quiet strength. "I want you to know of her maternal energy. She has 3 wonderful, beautiful children, and she took lots and lots of care to protect them. She's the kind of person that when she walks in a room, everything lights up." Royal, the 10-year-old who'd been shot, had to leave the vigil early for follow-up medical care. She was shot at her mother's side. She is healing. But what does healing even look like for a child who watched her mother get murdered in front of her? Because of Rayven's lupus and kidney disease, Her dialysis treatments had made it impossible for her to qualify for life insurance. So when she died, her family was left not just with grief, but with nothing. No financial cushion, no plan, 3 children, all of whom now needed therapy, legal support, food, housing, and a future. A GoFundMe was launched on Valentine's Day, February 14th, by a family friend named Lucy Minnick. It quickly raised over $29,000 toward a $100,000 goal. People who had never met Rayven Edwards were donating, sending messages, sharing her story. Jennifer Wesbury of D.C. Safe, a nonprofit that supports domestic violence victims in the district, put it plainly, it's devastating. Devastating to the community. Devastating to the children. The generational impact of having to live with the violence that occurred. And she's right. The damage doesn't stop at the headline. It ripples. It settles into children. It reshapes families. It follows people for decades. So here we are. And I want to take a moment to just talk to you directly, because I think the story raises some really uncomfortable questions that we don't ask often enough. Stephon Jeter was a convicted felon. He had done federal time for gun trafficking. He was legally forbidden from touching a firearm. The courts had protective orders connected to his name. Police had responded to domestic calls at this home multiple times. The family had been begging for help. Rayven's mother said they had been changing locks, warning anyone who would listen about how dangerous this man was. And yet, on a Wednesday afternoon in broad daylight, in front of her children, Rayven Edwards was killed by this man with a gun he was not legally allowed to have. So I want you to think about this with me for a minute. At what point does the system have enough information to step in and actually protect someone? If there are police calls, court orders of violent criminal history, and a family screaming that something bad is coming, what else needs to happen before we treat that as an emergency? And why is it that the women most at risk of being killed by a domestic abuser are often the same ones who are terrified to fully report it? Because they fear for their children, fear retaliation, or simply fear that the system won't protect them anyway? Rayven wasn't naive. She knew Stephon was dangerous. Her family knew it. She still tried to protect her children from losing their father by not fully pushing him out. And that same love, that same maternal instinct that made her who she was, may have cost her life. And then there's Million, a 3-year-old boy. His mother is gone. His father is gone. He is going to grow up asking questions that nobody can fully answer. What do you tell a child like that? How do you raise him to understand love when the first love story he was born into ended in violence? How do you help Royal, the 10-year-old who stood in that parking lot bleeding, telling strangers her mother was dead? How do you help her trust the world again? How do you help John, the 8-year-old who saw all of it, process a trauma that most adults couldn't survive mentally? These are the children that Rayven gave everything for. The children she dialyzed herself twice a week for. The children she changed the locks for. The children she was still standing in that building for on February 11th. And I think that's what makes this story so hard to sit with. Because Rayven Edwards was not a stranger to danger. She wasn't unaware. She wasn't passive. She was a woman navigating an impossible situation with a sick body, 3 kids, and a man who refused to let her go. She was trying. She just ran out of time. Her aunt said it best. She smiles with her eyes. Her light is powerful. And now that light is gone. Taken on a Wednesday afternoon in February, in front of the 3 people she loved most in this world. So before you go, I want to leave you with some real questions to sit with. How many women right now are in the exact same situation Rayven was in, trying to protect their children from losing a father while simultaneously trying to protect themselves from that same man? How many families are making calls to the police, changing locks, issuing warnings, and still watching someone they love get hurt? And how many of us have looked the other way when we suspected someone close to us was in danger because it felt like none of our business? Domestic violence does not always look like what we imagine. It doesn't always start with a black eye. It starts with control, with keys being taken, with threats that nobody outside the relationship hears, with a person being slowly cut off from the strength to leave. By the time it becomes visible, it is often already too late. Rayven Amuan Edwards was 34 years old. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had lupus, and she still showed up for her kids. She had her life threatened, and she still tried to build something. She deserved protection. She deserved more time. She deserved to see her children grow up. And now her children have to grow up without her. If this story moved you, and I really hope it did, please share it. Share it for Rayven. Share it for Royal, John, and Million. Share it for every woman right now who is trying to figure out how to get out safely. If you're not already subscribed to Crime Files, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and click the bell so you get notified every time we drop a new story. Because these stories don't end when the news cycle moves on. These families are still living them. And the least we can do is make sure the world doesn't forget. Rest easy, Rayven.